Hey guys. So, as someone with stage 5 brain rot, I don't really get around to reading that much these days. It's just the power of my phone is too great for my goldfish brain to resist. But I do love books. I really love the way that authors can create these worlds and stories that let us travel away to faraway places where we can live in the world of our imagination. And where we can escape from the all-consuming void of existential dread. But even though these stories are fiction, they often lead us back to something real, because we get to live inside the heads of our favorite characters, seeing the world through their eyes, feeling their emotions deeply, and learning important life lessons along with them. Also, books from past generations can act like time capsules, engraved with the essence of the culture they were written in and preserving a piece of that society, like the proverbial mosquito in amber. They present their values, beliefs, perspectives, worldviews, etc., which we then continue to preserve by interacting with them. And then through that interaction, it continues to influence us and our own cultural identity. There's this quote from Francisco de Quevedo that I like, where he says that reading is like listening to the dead with your eyes. It's this symbiotic relationship where in order for ancient stories, authors, or cultures to stay alive, we need their words and they need our eyes. So reading is like a conversation between the reader and the author where they work together to bring life to what would otherwise remain just dry letters on lifeless paper. And it's this very relationship that allows books to remain culturally immortal, which is a term I stole from Edith in her book about the Odyssey, where she describes a multitude of reasons why a book may endure throughout the ages and into our modern society. And this is a good segue into the next part of the video, where I would like to use the Odyssey as an example to show why literature is so impactful and how it can achieve this status of cultural immortality. Alright, the Odyssey. So, a bit of background information. The Odyssey was originally part of an oral tradition, which means it was performed orally by bards or professional poets, which were called rhapsodes, which is honestly super impressive because this story is massive. But, rhapsodes and bards would use certain strategies like repeated phrases, which we can see throughout the story, which would help them keep their place and remember the next line. But this also means that there were multiple different versions being told, depending on who was telling it. And it wasn't until it was written down eventually in the 8th to 7th century BCE that the story really became set in stone. And the person to actually write it down was Homer. Or at least that's what we think. But we don't actually really know that much about him. We know that he was probably born in Ionia, which is present-day Turkey, but that's kind of about it. So there's a lot of speculation about who he is, a lot of different hypotheses. The most common and most widely accepted is that he was a blind bard, but there's some who say that he was one of Penelope's lovers, or that he was actually a woman, and even other people think that he was actually Odysseus himself. But even though we don't really know who he is, his literature formed the basis of ancient Greek society. Now, one of the main reasons for this is because Homer's epics, both the Iliad and the Odyssey, were used in education. So virtually all Greek men of the 7th century BCE knew Homer because they used his epics in school to learn the alphabet, to practice handwriting, to practice the art of memorization, summarization, and more. It was just so ingrained in their life that it became inextricably linked with their culture. And it naturally affected the way that they viewed and interacted with the world around them, and it shaped any art or literature or other media that they produced. But its impact didn't stop there, because ancient Greece has since become the foundation for our modern Western society. We can see the influences of ancient Greece in literally every aspect of our society, like the concept of democracy and the way we run our government, which was first developed in Athens, or the philosophies of Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, which are still crucial aspects of modern ethics and politics, or the development of our modern alphabet, which was based on the Phoenician alphabet, Or in medicine, Hippocrates, who was considered the father of medicine and created the Code of Ethics, which became the Hippocratic Oath. But most of all, Homer, and more specifically the Odyssey, have had a huge impact on literature and modern storytelling. So let's look at the story itself. So, quick recap for those who have never read the book or those who need a refresher. The story starts in Ithaca, where Odysseus' wife Penelope and their son Telemachus are managing life at the palace without Odysseus. But things aren't great. It's been about 20 years since Odysseus left for war, so everyone thinks he's dead. Which means Penelope has a long line of suitors who all want a chance at the throne. But they're basically just a bunch of frat boys who are getting drunk and trashing the place and impatiently waiting for Penelope to choose. But Penelope's adamant that Odysseus is still alive, so she tries to hold him off for as long as possible. Meanwhile, back at the ranch. So, Odysseus is stuck on Calypso's island, where she's trapped him for 7 years. Because she's like, please, Odysseus, love me. And he's like, no, I want to get back to my wife and kid. So Odysseus tries to escape, but fails. Because he pissed off Poseidon, for reasons I will soon explain. So he ends up on a different island called Phaeacia, where he tells his story to the king and queen. Flashback to 10 years ago. Odysseus and his army have just defeated Troy, and they're ready to finally return home after 10 long years of war. But what should have been a 6-day journey turned into a 10-year Mediterranean cruise from hell. As soon as Odysseus and his crew set sail, they're blown off course, and they end up on this island of the Lotus Eaters, who are basically a bunch of potheads that turn Odysseus' crew into addicts. But Odysseus manages to drag most of his crew back to the ship, and they set sail again. This time they land on an island which seems more promising because it has a bunch of sheep for them to eat. Unfortunately, this cave belongs to the Cyclops Polyphemus, who traps them, kills a couple of the crewmates, and plans to eat the rest of them after a nice little nap. But Odysseus, who introduced himself by the name of Nobody, stabs Polyphemus in the eye, and he and his crew manage to escape, while the Cyclops calls out to his other buddies, saying, help! Nobody hurt me! And they're like, haha, okay, whatever you say. And then, in the biggest act of stupidity, Odysseus lets his pride get the best of him, and he taunts the Cyclops. He's like, hey, you big stupid beast! If anyone asks you who beat you, it was I, the great Odysseus, king of Ithaca. Like, bro straight up doxes himself, and then proceeds to face karmic retribution, because the Cyclops goes and complains to dear old dad Poseidon, who gets pissed off and tries to make Odysseus' journey home as difficult and painful as possible. So, after leaving the Cyclops, Odysseus and his crew encounter cannibal giants, a sorceress called Circe, who turns them all into pigs, deadly sirens, and a horrifying 6-headed creature called Scylla, and her supersized man-eating whirlpool. Throughout all this, Odysseus' crew die one by one until Odysseus is left alone and stranded on Calypso's island where we first found him. Ultimately, Odysseus is able to make it back to Ithaca, kills all the suitors, and finally reunites with his son and wife in a heartwarming display of affection. So, there's kind of a lot going on with the Odyssey. It's a super long story with a ton of characters and lots of different plot lines. But that's kind of part of what makes it so great and so enduring. Edith Hall points out in her book that one of the reasons it's endured for so long is because it has such a huge variety of characters that anyone, either ancient or modern, can find someone that they identify with. It also features key themes that speak to our human nature and resonate with audiences all across the world and all throughout time. Themes like wandering and homecoming, revenge, trials and temptations, hubris, fate versus free will, love and grief, and deceit and disguise. So, no matter who you are or what you're going through, you're bound to find something in this story that speaks to you. Not only that, but the Odyssey has pretty much defined our concept of the hero's journey. which is a term that was popularized by Joseph Campbell, but it basically just refers to the template that most hero stories follow, which usually starts with the protagonist's call to adventure, which, in the case of the Odyssey, is the abduction of Helen of Troy, which instigated the Trojan War and thus called Odysseus to venture out of Ithaca. But you can also think of stories like Lord of the Rings, where Frodo is called into his adventure after Bilbo disappears and he is tasked with taking the ring out of the Shire. After this, the hero may or may not meet with a mentor, which for Odysseus would be Athena, or for Frodo would be Gandalf. And then the hero crosses the threshold, which just means that's the point where the hero accepts their calling and commits to the adventure. Then come trials and failures, followed by growth and new skills, then possible death and rebirth, revelations, and then the hero might experience changes or reach atonement, get gifts, and then finally return home a new person. Which again, all of this we can see in the Odyssey. And Odysseus himself paved the way for the modern Western hero archetype. He's the ideal hero. He's intelligent, brave, resilient, and he will do whatever it takes to protect and make it back to his family. Except for the Cyclops incident, which we're choosing to ignore. You know, we can't all be perfect. Anyway, the Odyssey has inspired endless adaptations and shaped our cultural imagination to the point where its influence can be found in virtually every genre of media, and it's nearly impossible to separate ourselves from it. So, yeah. Whether you read it or not, the Odyssey still impacts your everyday life, which is crazy to think about. And once again, it just shows how influential and valuable literature is to our society as a whole. Definitely check out the book if you haven't read it before. And also, there are a lot of really cool resources and videos that I watched to help me create this video that I will link in the description. So also give those a look if you want to know more. And yeah, I hope this video was entertaining and thank you for watching.